It's time for the Burning Kingdoms trilogy review, and I'm going to wonder if I do it justice, but we're just going to try. We're just going to do the best we can. These should you reads are spoiler-free. I won't talk about plot points, I won't talk about world-building reveals, I won't talk about character arc, end points. It's just to give you a sense of if this is a series that's worth your time, especially now that it's finished. I know a lot of you don't like to pick up series until they're finished. Well, it's finished now. It's finished now, and here is my series review. My experience with this trilogy. I have been reading it since it came out. And it's come out since I've been on BookTube, so there is a review of The Jasmine Throne on my channel, the first book in this series. And yeah, I have read The Jasmine Throne 3 times, The Only Undersword twice, and The Lotus Empire once. So I would say that I have really been enjoying this trilogy to reread it that many times. And I have physically read it, and I have listened to the audiobook, and I have done both, and I love it in all of those forms. If you're an audiobook listener, I think the audiobook is done incredibly well. Some really good voice acting in there. Like, it's just one narrator, but like the way that she paces dialogue and expresses emotion, I think is actually done in a subtle way that doesn't distract you, but it does add that just extra emphasis. So I can basically recommend all those styles. I just like Tasha Suri's writing. I think it's very lush, but not too indulgently detailed. And I think that's a hard balance to really give you the atmosphere of a scene without just getting lost in the weeds of like all the detailed worlds. And especially for me, someone who's not a visual reader, I truly felt the climate, the weather, the space of these places, especially in the first book. What's the premise? And like, this is where it gets tricky because the genre of this is high epic fantasy. This is high epic fantasy with politics. There is a romance subplot. It's like kind of your bread and butter fantasy trilogy here. It has some differences. It is South Asian inspired, I think primarily India. We don't have too many of those. We have a basically almost all female cast. There's like one male main character. So that's a slight difference maybe. The magic is like this fun kind of nature magic, but there's also more going on that I can't talk about because I said I wouldn't spoil world building things, but there's definitely like we're uncovering the mysteries of the magic. So if you like that in your high epic fantasy, which I do. And like something I would say that it does relatively well is it doesn't quite leave the plights of the first book behind. I do think in a high epic fantasy trilogy, we have a standard trajectory. We start small in the first book. We get to know our characters. We get to know the world. We have an attainable task in the first book-ish. Now, I would say The Jasmine Throne is not quite that. It actually is a little more ambitious than that, but that's like, you know, usually the first book of a trilogy. And then by the third book, things are so out of hand that we are just like, whatever problems we had in the first book, we just can't even. We can't even deal with them right now because we have this thing we have to handle. And I think it does a relatively good job at not leaving all of those smaller problems behind. Not a perfect job, but I think a pretty good job. And we are primarily following, though, like at its core, though, this is character evolution studies. You are following these 3 women and what they're willing to do to meet their agendas, to sacrifice for what they think is right or what they want. And that's what you follow throughout this trilogy as different events unfurl. So I guess the best way for me to sell this is probably to just talk about those 3 characters, because I can talk about them relatively spoiler-free. They're just so, like, I feel like I know these people. I love them quite a bit. Probably the main character. Like, if I had to say who is our number 1 main character, it's Priya. She's on the cover of The Jasmine Throne. And she has a mysterious past. And she's kind of she's not dumb, but she's not like super smart. She's just more resourceful. She's a resourceful character. And she's strong. And she is fascinating because she's trying to remember herself. And so a lot of this trilogy's journey for her is her playing with agency, suddenly having agency and choosing what to do with it, who to trust, who to use her resources with, how much is she willing to sacrifice and to what end. Priya is a good character. I would actually say all these characters are generally good, but they're the morally gray that I don't think we get to read anymore, where it's not necessarily that they don't do bad things. They do bad things, but they legit are doing it, I think, for reasons that are relatable and empathetic. And that is, I think, a really fun version of morally gray. I think sometimes morally gray where it's just like a grimdark character and it's just like, I know you're my hero, but like your thoughts are obnoxious. And like, it's like, I don't love grimdark a lot because sometimes it can just be hard to root for those characters. These are you can root for them, but then you're also just like, why are you doing that? You should not do that. Like, it's that type of energy for all of them. And Priya is just a really fascinating example of that because her agenda isn't even really revealed to herself. She's discovering what she wants, what it is to want. And I really love that about her character. She's going to tie you the most to the magic of the world. So if you like following the character that is the character with the access to the magic of it all, that's her. We have Malini, who I think most people, if they're going to dislike a character out the gate, it's going to be Malini. But I like Malini. I think she's great. Malini is the princess of this land. So I don't know if I brought it up, but where Priya's from is an occupied land, and it's occupied by Malini's kingdom. Her brother is the emperor. He's in charge. And at the very start of this book, so I guess if you are so spoiler sensitive to like the first page of this book, that's what I'm spoiling right now. He demands that his sister sacrifices herself on a pyre and burns, because that is a part of their religion. And she says no. So he exiles her to Ahiranya, to this temple called the Harana. And that's where she is at the start of this journey. She is a woman who desperately, unapologetically wants power. And I think that's awesome. And her journey is dealing with that agenda and then learning what other things she might want and how also to maintain that agenda and the other responsibilities she gets as that comes along. Oh, she's a manipulative character. It's like hard on her sleeve, manipulative, and I find that fascinating. It's a different way of being morally gray where it's like, she's a main character. I'm rooting for her, but she's not doing things main character heroes are supposed to be doing. And I really like her for that. Malini and Priya intersect a lot and really challenge each other a lot in ways that are really fun to see on the page. And then we have Bhumika, who's definitely more of a supporting character, but I love her a lot. And I think people who like competent characters are also going to love Bhumika. She is so aggressively competent that it's just such a nice thing to read. I don't know how often you get to read competent characters, but I don't, and she's amazing. So she is from the highborn class of this occupied land, but also has a connection to kind of the religion that's been tampered down. So she's this crossroads, and she marries by choice the regent so that she can try to fight for her people. And that's who she is. She is consistently trying to fight for her people, and her version of fighting is not really sexy. Like, it's like keeping the books straight. It's like figuring out, well, yes, it would be great if we could just do a rebellion, but then where are we getting the food from? We trade with everybody. Like, I really love Bhumika, and she makes some really difficult decisions in this series based off her agenda of protecting this land. So the big selling point of this entire series are those characters and what they go through. And there are other side characters. This is a multi-POV book, but those are the point of views you're going to read the most. There's another character named Rao. He's fine. Like, Rao's okay. Sometimes I just want to slap Rao a little bit, but he's fine. He's an interesting perspective to have. Just not nearly as, I feel, fleshed out as these three characters to me. Now, themes, I've already kind of touched on them because they're all intertwined with these characters, are just agency, sacrifice, power, the cost. Like, there's so many costs and consequences in how this world and the situations are set up. An occupied land, striving for independence, but what are the costs and the different avenues to get there? And then also, there's like it's colonialization, occupation. It's definitely a huge theme, and it's done in very obvious ways, like the Ahiranya occupation, and in little subtler ways with like the magic system stuff that gets discussed later. It's pretty great. I really enjoy it. So I think the themes, they go hand in hand with the characters and their actions, and that's like the way I like it to be. It's so intertwined that you can't unravel it, but you're also not being hit in the face with it, per se. Like, people aren't just philosophizing about these things. It's just their actions show you what this character's interpretation of the events are, and it's just real characters doing things, and you're just like, huh, what do I think about that thing? What do I think about this thing? And like, you as the reader are just like watching things unfurl and like revising and making new conclusions, and I just really love that. Now we're going to talk about some stuff that just might not be as good. I should probably start by saying my favorite book's the first book. Hands down. I love the Jasmine Throne with my entire being. It's the most intimate. It's the most claustrophobic. It's the one where I feel like each room is vibrant. As things get bigger, I lose some of that. And it doesn't make me lose it to the point where I don't enjoy the series. I think it's still great. And actually, I think the scope it tries to handle, it wrangles into a relatively good shape. But that said, that means the Jasmine Throne, I just feel like, is the best version of everything for me. Now, that said, I love getting to see the entire thought experiment come through. And I think each book is actually, I mean, they're all definitely related to each other. They're not like different books. I mean, they are, but you know what I mean. Like, the same author wrote all of them. It's the same characters. You're not going to be like, why are we suddenly here? But they all are tackling a different problem. And I think their pacing reflects that. So when you have a more intimate book, I feel that in the Jasmine Throne. I feel where we're focusing our attentions. I could feel the communities, the riots, the tension. The second book, when we're opening it up, the global space does feel more open. I do feel the distance between characters. And this third book, where we do have to like wrap things up, because it's the end. We need to find solutions to the big problems, get our characters into the places so that they can be the points of interest that do the things, because it's a fantasy book and that's what we do. And I'm not knocking that. That's just what we do in fantasy books. And because of that, it's just even more sprawled out. And so I get all the character stuff I love, but I get less of the atmosphere and less of the world building that I was really also loving the first two books. And I just think each book, as we expand things, we lose a little of that. And the pacing does something different. And it reminds me a lot of the Greenbone Saga, if you've read that, where the first book, it's like, this is a year. It's very clear cut that this is a year. We're getting a lot of detail throughout this year. In the second book, it's like, this is a stretch of time, and we're doing a lot of time jumps. And it's good because I don't need to see someone be on an airplane. But that same thing with Oleander Sword. And then if you've read Jade Legacy, it's like time jumps to time jumps. And this one's less like huge time jumps, but again, it's just that like you get a lot of hopping in and out of scenes. So the being able to stick into a moment for a long period of time becomes less. And I think that's just another reason why I love the first book so much more. And I do think if you've read Jade Legacy is a better version of that technique than what happens in the Lotus Empire. Not to say that it's bad, but I'm just saying that like I really like the Jade Legacy. And the Lotus Empire I do really like, but it did leave me wanting, and for the main reason of the world building, and not that it's not like a real world. I think it's completely a real world. But there's a lot of fun lore and mysteries. And when you tease me with lore and mysteries, I would like to understand some stuff. And I understand a lot. That's not to say that things are not understood or explained. But this has always been kind of one of those, like, somewhere between soft and hard magic. Like, there are rules, there are limitations. There is a source, and you're slowly understanding how this happens. But then in the third book, there are things that happened that you're just like, I don't know why that happened. I think I get why it could happen, so I will go with it. But you just have to go with it and hand wave a lot more in the third book than I would like to. I didn't dislike it, per se, but it was just like, oh, man, I really do wish we knew more about this thing, because that would, you know, help me interpret why this scene happened the way it did and maybe make that scene hit harder for me. And one of the reasons why the world building is slightly a letdown is because it's so cool, okay? Like, that's the only issue. It's like, it's this returning magic. It's got some body horror elements. It's nature-based. It has extreme consequence cost for using. It seems to be tied to religion. It's so cool. So that's why I was just so like, give me more, give me more. You don't have to tell me like the entire encyclopedia article on how this works, but like, there were reasons why later on, because of the consequences associated with the magic, that I'm like, I feel like I needed a tiny bit more insight. Just a smidge. And I'm being vague because, again, I can't tell you what happens in the third book of the series. Like, you know. But that said, even though, like, that's probably the thing. Like, the intimacy moving away because we have stretches of time, because we have stretches of location, so we're less in a spot. And then also, I still, like, I just have world-building curiosities. Like, they aren't essential questions. I think they're only essential in that there are some large moments that happen at the end of the book that I'm like, I wasn't really anticipating that, because I don't think I was given the information to understand the significance of this moment, if that makes sense. But that is all to say, big question, did it stick the landing? I would say yeah. I would say yeah. Like, it's not my strongest finale, but this happens to me a lot, where, like, I have such a high bar for an ending to a series. Very few clear it. Very, very few. I think The handful are like Jade Legacy, The Discord of Gods. Like, I mean, even now, like, Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson is like my least favorite Mistborn book. Like, so I mean, I'm a hard sell on a series ender because I'm kind of a stickler. I would say I like it maybe as much as I like Labyrinth's Heart, which is the Rook and the Rose book 3, which I really enjoy that series. But if you remember my review for that series, The Mask of Mirrors is my favorite book. And here, The Jasmine Throne is my favorite book. And it's for similar reasons. That intimacy, that getting to know things, that beginning is so strong for both of them. Not to say the other ones aren't, you know, great books. I'm not rating anything in this series below 4 stars. I think the last book is like, if I did quarter stars, like a 4.25. You know, like that's a really good book. So I think it's worth your time, especially if you love these characters, because that stays strong the entire time. Everything else that I've been nitpicking at to provide you with like a holistic expectation of experience, I love Priya the entire time. I love Malini the entire time. Like, and the ending, when you have to deal with, it's the end of the book, and we have set up stuff, and we have to deal with the stuff. You deal with the stuff, and I think that's handled fairly well. So, yeah, that's my review of the Burning Kingdoms trilogy. No excuse to not read it now. They're all out. They're all great. Highly recommend. They are available at most libraries in the United States, so no excuse there either. They are not like hidden away behind Audible exclusives or Kindle Unlimited walls. They are ready for you to try out. All right, so any comments you leave down below need to be spoiler-free. Any spoiler comments, I get rid of because this is a spoiler-free place. If you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, it can be fire or a flower, or both, whatever brings you joy. And let me know if you have any questions down below. I'm happy to answer them. And I think that's it for this one. Like if you like to, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one.